among these folks.
And I'm Jess Devaney, and producer of Call Center Blues.
And I'm Jeff Seelbach. I work at a platform called Topic, and we work together with Jess and Geeta on Call Center Blues.
Awesome. Thank you all again for joining us. And, there's not really this is sort of our opening night program, and there's not really any specific similarities on the surface of all your films, but the one thing I sort of kind of happenstance came upon in watching all of your films is a real, there's a tenderness and something that seems really cherished and with all of your movies, and but within struggle. And I guess I'm curious for the filmmakers, what's your relationship to creating that kind of tenderness and that tone within your films? And that's kind of for everybody. Brendan, if you want to start it off.
The tenderness. I don't know. It's kind of just the tone that the film kind of wanted to be, I think. I sort of, it's a story about struggle. It's sort of an abstracted, almost archetypal, archetypal story about struggle, and sort of using the almost tropey character of this struggling artist to kind of convey that and to sort of build a world that feels slightly outside of normal reality, so you can just kind of probe this problem without the context of day-to-day and kind of our current events, political context, things like that. So I was striving for something that was a bit more abstracted and maybe timeless or universal or something in telling that story. And I think the kind of whatever it came out in the tone is just sort of what was natural to me and to that story and felt right for it. So I think, it's just the sort of lightness and humor that is present in life for me in those types of situations. So,
yeah. And I noticed with it seemed obviously, movies are personal, but I couldn't help but feel like the protection, like the protection of his art, and something like that. Was that something that was coming from a place from within yourself, or was that just kind of more of just a general concept?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's hard. I think there's a lot of people who are compelled to make things, and making things, I think, is pretty human and pretty natural, the desire to make things. But to then go out and share them, it requires a real vulnerability and courage to do that. And I think it's really hard for a lot of people to do that. So I was just trying to kind of convey this thing of making something that you really love and care about, and then being sort of forced to share it, even if you do want to but don't know how, just to be forced to and to figure out how to go about that and how to go about sort of changing the purpose of this thing that is sort of initially designed to give an artist, give a person meaning and personal fulfillment, or to just pursue their own emotional kind of journey or whatever it is, and then to turn that around and share it with the world. The risks that come along with that are kind of what I wanted to investigate with this. So,
Geeta, you've made a bunch of documentaries and this film is spectacular, and there's so many people that get a chance to have sort of a focus on them in your film, and they all seem to feel very comfortable with you, and I really love the pacing of your film as well. Just about tone and tenderness, and especially within a documentary where there is some construction, but also it being organic as well.
Sure. So I think for, Jessica and Jeff and I who work in documentary film, one of the things that's obviously very different than narrative is there is no script. You're dealing with real people and all their complications. And so I think having been in this now for a little while, one of the key things that you learn is that a good documentary film still needs to have the feel of a narrative, in the sense that you want your audience to really attach to the participants in a way they would in a scripted film. And I think the importance is that it's what differentiates, a sort of documentary film from news, is the idea that you really get invested in these characters. You feel that you know them, you could walk in their shoes, or, and you care about them. And it's interesting because obviously in a longer format film, it's easier to do that. You can spend more time with them. In a shorter film, it can be more challenging. And I think we all face that in the short form, is getting people to really invest in the characters and their stories. But I think for me, what was this is the story of Call Center Blues, which is the story of a community of the deported who are currently living in Tijuana, Mexico. The story automatically has it's a story of displacement and longing and loss, but also of resilience. So I think the tenderness that you mention is really, it's interesting. The tenderness is almost, in the way these folks have managed to carry on, but still it's how they feel for this country that they still see as their homeland, even if they've been living outside of it for almost half their life. So that was what was interesting to me, is the sort of that dynamic. And then also there's obviously a power structure dynamic there, where you're talking the U.S., where we have a administration that has, in 2019 alone, deported 267,000 people, many of them not actual criminal offenders, like folks who did not commit a crime, but were here undocumented. And the administration has also stripped away sort of everything, any policies that supported immigration at all, and has put forth bans, and is building a wall. So at our southern borders. So it's really like this amazing love for a country that has done everything possible to reject you and to displace you and to marginalize you. So I think that's where that came from for my team.
And I want to get back to, I have some follow-up questions about that, but for Gosha, and it's kind of leading off of that, and the experience of Call Center Blues being a film where people want to get back into their country, or they feel alienated or ostracized by a country that they were in. Your film is such a tender portrait of a young person having to come to terms with a parent having no control over where they are and assimilating into American culture, and the casting of the father and the daughter is like incredible. How did you come across them, and where did that dynamic come from for you of wanting to explore that?
Well, I mean, I guess in the conversation of immigration, I'm not an immigrant myself, but my parents are both immigrants. They're granted asylum here, and they came here and had me. And when I talk about immigration with friends, the central kind of point is about borders and border crossing and walls, and it's very much about the physical and apparent obstacles related to the immigrant experience. And I found myself not being able to talk about that because that's not been my experience, but I did find myself being able to add to that conversation by touching a little bit on the more inapparent or invisible, I guess, obstacles that are of the immigrant experience, and that's mainly of assimilation and everything that goes on internally after. And I was really fascinated by that because it's not something you see. It's not something you can really pick up on either. It's really just you know if you know, and you only know if you've been through it. And so that kind of internal tug of war that Lena faces between assimilating and being faithful to America and American culture and this new world and her future, basically, or her past, her Russian heritage, her father, because he can't really, he can't really adapt as easily as she can. That kind of struggle fascinated me, and I was reflected from a personal experience I had. so that's kind of what fascinated me about that story, and how I wanted to add to the conversation about immigrant experience, and to talk about the tenderness. I guess I can't say it was deliberate, but when I sit down and write a story or make a film, I try to do it so it's like the main character wrote it or filmed it. I guess point of view is what is the phrase we can throw in there. But from Lena's point of view, although the situation is pretty unfortunate and traumatizing from our vantage point as audience members, and I think from hers, it's not so much. It's being a child, you don't know much about the layers of consequences and layers of anxiety and tension and sadness that go with that type of experience. And so all she can see is what's right in front of her and the opportunities that she can make from it, as most kids do. And I think that keeping that point of view hers, and I think that kind of offset a lot of the trauma that comes with that type of situation. I think tenderness is maybe the synthesis.
It's a good transition into, I guess, finding the stars and the central figures of everybody's films. And for you, Gosha, how did you come about finding those two actors? Because it really kind of lives and dies on the chemistry that they had, and it's really remarkable what you accomplished with both of them. Their performances are incredible.
Thank you. The Russian community in LA is very tight knit. We all hang out with each other, share an experience, share similar qualms with American culture. And so it took 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees to find both of them. And though they have film experience behind them, it was really about casting people who knew these characters and knew the story in their bones, and could not necessarily pretend, but work through that truth, and exercise it or fuel it for the performance. And so it was, with them, it was very much not about not rehearsing. We rehearsed as little as possible because I wanted to preserve that truth in them for the right moment, because I think we were all afraid that because it was very true to their own experience. Zoe, who plays Lena, came here 2 years ago. She's struggling at school. And Konstantin, who plays her dad, also immigrated here, and he understands the struggle working as an actor. So I think we all kind of waited until we got onto set, and we could just kind of unearth that truth in front of the camera.
Gita, we have a question that kind of leads into what I was already going from Cheryl Hilton. Cheers and gratitude to all three of you for your art. Gita, how did you find out about this reality? And so I guess that was sort of where I was going to go, is how did you come in contact with this really diverse group of people that are living in Tijuana? Did you approach them, or did somebody come and seek you out? And what's your process for finding which films you're going to be working on and which people you're going to be
Sure.
working? Yeah.
Sure. So I think this story has always fascinated me. I come from, like Gosha, my family is an immigrant family. And so even I was similarly born here in the US, but, had the lived experience of again, very similar experiences to what Gosha mentioned. But I think for me, so I've always been interested in this topic. And then I noted that, again, over the last number of years, we hear a lot of stories about deportation, but we never really hear about what happens to folks once they are on the other side of the border, when they are returned, which feels like avoid in our coverage and of the issue, and the sort of the media narrative. It almost feels like it's kept from us in a way, to keep our focus in one place and to sort of align with the narrative of the powers that be. So I actually read an article, I believe it was in the New York Times, about the call centers, but it was a business article, I think, about the call centers that were springing up in Tijuana, specifically to recruit the English speaking folks, who had been deported, and how this was like this economic boom. And I remember thinking, this is, it's interesting. This is also around the world. There are these call centers that sort of opportunistically spring up. So this was really interesting to me. And I asked Jessica if she would do this with me. And we pitched to Jeff at Topic. And it was really, Jessica, I think you found Abraham Avila, who I have to mention. He was our producer on the ground in Tijuana, and he was really responsible for helping us find these folks. And Jess, do you want to talk a little bit about how that happens, just because you were key in that?
We knew we needed to work with someone locally, both for trust and accountability, and also there's a producer, Patricia Benabe, who I worked with a lot on a number of projects, and Geeta and I worked with on our previous short, who's done a lot of work in Tijuana. So it just, we came to him through her and just kind of the broader community network. So it was really important that we, knew him, even through other relationships and through their relationship. And so we also brought Patricia onto the team as well, to consult as we were casting.
Mm-hmm. And I think he spent a lot of time he spent a lot of time like finding folks who were willing to go on camera, because it was actually challenging. We had a really hard time. For a lot of the deportees, they feel there's a stigma. They feel a tremendous amount of shame. They feel, they also too, some of them still might be planning to try to cross the border, so they can't be on camera. It puts them in danger. Any record of them puts them in danger. And interestingly, we could not find a woman who worked at the call centers who was deported who was really willing to talk to us. So interesting. And then Abraham found Jenna and Alondra, our two characters, who ultimately ended up in Tijuana, still by way of deportation, because they were homeless in California because Alondra's mother had been deported. So I think the point of that story was really that deportation obviously just doesn't affect the deported. It's a ripple effect on an entire family and therefore communities. And it's how communities are sort of ripped apart. But yeah, it was definitely challenging. And, there was a lot of trust building, and we have to thank our team on the ground. They were critical.
Speaking of on the ground, how many days on the ground? How many days in Tijuana?
Jessica, how many days were we there?
10, two 5-day shoots.
That must have been a whirlwind of 10 days.
It was. It felt like a year to me, but then I think for Jessica was like, it's only 10 days, calm down. Yeah.
Brendan, I am a huge fan of Succession. I love Nicholas Braun so much. He's amazing. He's amazing in your film. How'd you get in touch with Nicholas? What attracted you to Nicholas as an actor?
I was just a fan of Nick on Succession as well. I was just watching the show and trying to make this short and looking for an actor, and was watching the first season of Succession and thought he was perfect. From there, went on Facebook and saw a mutual friend that we had and kind of reached out through my producer Noah, through him, and got the script to Nick, and was just really lucky that he liked it and had time to do the project with me. So a few months later, we were able to go into production when he was available, and it just worked out. It's really great. That he was willing to do it, but kind of a simple process, actually. Really, really lucky. So
yeah, the outro music, the music throughout, the credits, the font of the credits, the art that is in there, it feels very it has like a very specific palette and feeling, again, like kind of going to like this sort of gentle thing. Is that something that you have a real heavy hand in, or was that a combination of you and your creative collaborators on the film?
Yeah, I mean everything's a collaboration for sure. I had a really talented DP and production designer working on the film with me. I had some really great painters make the paintings that Victor painted in the film, and it's all guided by this sort of world that I'm trying to set up from the beginning. The music or the song that plays at the end of the film is kind of like really the thing that triggered the film for me. I just really loved that song, and it kind of like that image at the end of the film came to my head, and the film almost emerged from there, sort of in reverse. So it's all, yeah, it's certainly formed to an extent beforehand, and then taken much further on set with my collaborators. My partner is a production designer and did the film with me, and was able to convince, and that's Meredith Lippincott, was able to convince Lyle Vincent, who's a super talented DP, to come on and shoot it. And I've worked as a producer in the past too, and co-produced a movie called Good Time, which is how I knew Buddy Duress, who's also in the short. And we had some leftover 35 millimeter film from Good Time that was kind of just rotting in a storage unit. And so I was like, we've got to make this movie before that stuff disintegrates. So you don't really get to shoot shorts on 35 millimeter very often. And we were able to do it for kind of the cheapest possible way. So it was a little expired and a little faded, which worked out for the best, I think. Yeah.
So good. Yeah, that's an awesome way of coming. I was going to ask you about the choice of working with 60 millimeter over 35 millimeter, and I love how organic that was. That's so cool. And obviously, like, Good Time is an amazing film, and the work that you've gotten to do as a producer, is like. But the jump to directing, how long had you known that you wanted to direct? Was it something you were waiting for, or something that you were just kind of wait and see?
Yeah, I mean, it's been tricky. I didn't like come from a film, I didn't study film in college. I went to school for business. I grew up outside Philadelphia. I didn't really think I could work in film. And so I kind of pursued any job I could get in film. I worked in film accounting, which then became film producing. And then from there, kind of a number of years passed, and I've been writing and trying to make things. And this finally, I was able to get this together and do it and put some of the producing stuff on hold. So I want to do a lot more of this. I enjoyed a lot. I like producing very much too, but really would like to do a lot more directing. So hopefully we'll continue to from here.
I'm going to start opening it up, and I'm going to bring in David. David, be ready to talk, because I'm going to let you ask your question live. And David, you should be unmuted and live. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question about for Gosha. I love films that introduce me to other lived experiences, and I really enjoyed the music that you picked in Lena. Can you talk about why you picked Andrei Makarevich, and I'm not sure I ever pronounced the name right, the musician you used for your outro, and also are he and his band as popular in Russia as I suspect they are?
Sorry, what was the last part of your question?
I think it was about.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, David.
Is he and his band? I've never heard of him before, and I'm assuming that he's pretty popular in Russia. I'm wondering, is he?
Yes. This was a song that my dad listened to a lot. It was an artist that he liked as well. And a lot of Russian immigrants listen to the genre that of Andrei's song it's folk, but in Russia there's like a mix of like folk and poetry that like is a bit more, leans more on poetry than lyric. And so it kind of, the genre is very much about speaking your emotions. And a lot of Russian immigrants listen to that genre of music because it's nostalgic, and it kind of brings them back to their dacha. Dacha is it's like a summer home up by the lake or something. It's just kind of this idyllic, has this idyllic atmosphere, and I mean, partly it was just a transfer from childhood, putting it into the film, of hearing my dad listen to it, but it was also I also hoped it would kind of speak to the larger experience of Russian immigrants listening to that type of music and kind of like living and being stuck in their own past and their own country, previous country.
That's an amazing segue into my friend and coworker and cohort Phil's question. And Phil, I'm gonna unmute you and allow you to ask this question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for Gita and Gosha, I was wondering about language is very important in both of your movies. It's something that affects people's identities, the opportunities available to them. So I was wondering if you could talk about that and your approach to film and language, and also if there were any interesting experiences or special challenges that came with directing bilingually.
Sure, I can start. I think what's interesting for me, so I speak conversational Spanish and can get by, can definitely understand more than, you know, than what comes out of my mouth is like, but but I can definitely, so I'm able to get by. What was interesting for us is that I was probably, my experience was probably similar to a lot of our participants, because they, too, being having all been raised in the U.S. from a very, very young age, they were bilingual, but often I think their English was better than their Spanish. So the return to Tijuana, like I know in particular, Danny, one of our participants, said he didn't speak any Spanish, and when he met his wife, he had to basically use sign language, like he couldn't communicate with her. So I think I think for this this film was really about that duality, and for them, and Danny also said it. He said, you speak in Spanish, but you think in English. And I think for folks who do, again, for the deportees, they are displaced, but that is a constant thing in their lives. And as someone too who grew up speaking another language as my first language, and then English is the second language, I feel like that sometimes it almost is like you have too many neurons firing in your brain at the same time, and it's like you're switching, in your head. And so I feel like within the film, sound was really important to us, as far as trying to deal with like noise and stillness and silence and language. And I think the existence of our participants in this completely new space, that they were sort of forced into in Tijuana. We wanted that reflected in the soundscape, the music, and everything within the film. I think the challenges for me in the directing were really not so much the participants, but outside of that. Like if there was a location that we had to be in, and there was somebody that we had to talk to about it, it was definitely my producer on the ground who would have to step in more about logistics and legalities, et cetera, because my Spanish was was not at that level. So but I think it's familiar to me because of speaking a few languages. This directing, and Gosha, maybe it's the same for you, but speaking to multiple languages and directing them is a little bit second nature.
Yeah, similar to Gita, English was my second language. Unfortunately, it's conversational. I can speak conversational Russian. I'm not fully fluent, just because it's I think, like Spanish, it's such a rich language, and you really have to practice to be at a proficient level. And I don't really have many Russian friends my age here. I only speak to my parents in Russian. But on set and before, it was pretty difficult, to be honest. I wish it was easier, and it was kind of a struggle for me, communicating ideas. But the good thing is that I didn't really have to communicate much because the actors knew what this was about. They knew the story, and it in a weird way lends them like a latitude for them to tell their stories, because even though like we could communicate, it was, you know, I was giving adjustments, but in terms of like the minutia and the nuances, like that's something that I couldn't communicate, so it was left to them, and I think that kind of worked in everyone's favor, in the film's favor, because they injected that into their performance. And then in terms the narratively, to speak on language, it's the first marker of an immigrant that you can pick up on, is that they an accent, or that they can't speak. At least that's been my experience, and that's when that as soon as that happens, and that happens very quickly, you have to communicate. Okay, this person is an immigrant, okay. And I think it's very close to the immigrant experience, and it also, for Lena, it was a source of allyship. She can speak English, so in that conversation, she is trying to be an ally to her teacher, but she can also speak Russian, and so she's allied with her father. But it's complicated when you're in that position of power, that you can speak both languages, the others can't, but the spotlight is on you. So I think dramatically, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think and this is more of an observation, but I couldn't help but think for Lena, that of the skills that she is already developing, even though she's put in a position that is definitely not that is not completely fair for, you know, a child. Like, I couldn't help but think of the unique experience, and you mentioned it earlier, but the unique experience that she will have as a result of growing up this way. I'm curious of the importance or the symbolism of the like the math that comes onto the title card, or what is that kind of referring to, or what is that about?
I was working with a friend of mine who's a wonderful graphic designer, Elizabeth Goodspeed, and we were talking about themes and talking about visual directions to go in terms of the titles and the poster. And she had shown me, as a visual reference, she had shown me something she found. I mean, it's very common in elementary schools. I think we just forget about it, but it's when you're just learning to write cursive and write the alphabet, the letters are typed out and they have the arrows with the numbers of like in order of how you draw the letter. And so the short starts with Lena written in English, and the arrows with the numbers about like how you draw the letters, and it ends Lena in Russian, in Cyrillic, with also the diagrams, how to write it. And so I mean, that's something. I think it just goes back to point of view, and really just grounding it and anchoring it in her point of view. Like, that's probably a title that Lena would have chosen to put on the film, because that's something that she's going through, is learning how to write. And then in the end, when she chooses a song that's a Russian song, and the Cyrillic shows up and it's a Russian, Lena in Russian. I mean, I guess I can interpret it like it's her making a choice and choosing her Russia, or her Russian, you know, identity. But it was also like an opportunity to kind of like, the last moment of a lot of films is like breaking the fourth wall. Like, this person looks at the camera and they're looking right at you. And so this was a little bit of that moment. Is like this film, Lena teaching the viewer how to write her name.
it's Lena's Julianne Moore moment in Safe.
Mhm.
If that goes, yeah. Does anyone else have any questions from anyone in the members? I probably should have explained this earlier. If you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand in the participant area, or you can submit a question in the Q&A area as well. And if not, we can wrap it up unless any of the filmmakers have anything that they want to close out on. And I'm really fortunate and grateful to have all of you. I hope that I get to see you again during the festival as well, during the forums and the panels. And also we have some happy hours for the filmmakers as well. So I hope I get to chat it up with you a little bit more during the festival as well. And thank you for your amazing work. And I don't see any questions coming in. So unless I get it in the last second. Yeah,
I wanted to ask Brendan and Geeta what if you can share what you're thinking about working on next.
I have a feature film that's kind of an extension of this character that I'm trying to get made now. So figuring that out. We'll see.
Is that with Nick?
We're figuring it out still. We'll see. Maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
We'll see.
I have a couple different projects, which some are in production, and then COVID shut everything down. I'm working on getting into shape is basically all I'm doing right now, trying to survive. So I have a series, a documentary series that was in production with HBO, and yeah, we got we had to stop down. So we're trying to figure out how to come back. I think what's been really challenging, as you all know, shooting during this time. I have another project with Jessica, which is in development. But the shooting of anything, and for us in documentary, the shooting of a verite film, which means where you follow people around with the camera, and are probably constantly right here and in their face, is just not really possible right now. It's without putting everybody at great risk, or and so that it's become very complicated. So I think we're trying to all, and I'm sure all of you guys are too, just negotiate how to get, how do we go back safely, ethically, et cetera, that's really, I think that's my next project, is how to go back.
Geeta, I can't help but think that we are in the middle as a documentarian. We're in the middle of history, and sometimes I've felt aimless before the last 2 months and felt like we're in a post-history state of the world, and but right now it's really obvious that we are in it. And is there a compulsion for you, given the type of filmmaker you are, and for your whole team as well, of any ideas or anything to kind of, not to be opportunistic, but to contribute something or find something? What's the balance of that, I guess, or what's going through your brain as far as is there any compulsion to make anything given everything that's going on right now?
Sure. Interestingly, I think there is, as far as COVID goes, I haven't, because there's multiple things going on right now. Obviously, there is the uprising, that centers around Black Lives Matter and police brutality, et cetera, and sort of a general push against fascism. And I think and then there is COVID. For myself, I have felt compelled to produce work, and I have in the past, that has to do with police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement. And so there is some stuff that which I didn't mention, that I'm working on, that is based on that. I have a series with the New York Times called A Conversation on Race, and we are extending that now. We are doing more of those because it was a conversation we had 5 years ago post Ferguson, which is, again, here at the other end of it. But Jessica, and maybe, I don't know, Jessica, I'm sure too, you have a lot going on, which is exciting. But I don't know if you want to mention anything.
In terms of the movement for Black lives and conversation around racial equity in the country and in the industry, I think it's really important to be, as a producer, curating films that center, that really prioritize self-authorship and center folks who have a stake in the community that they're representing on screen, and to really counter this kind of extractive outsider looking in and tell stories that are really insiders looking around, which can mean a variety of things. And in terms of the COVID stuff, this is a really unprecedented kind of thing. And I am seeing like a lot of pitches on COVID and a lot of stuff coming our way. But I think for me, one of the biggest values of documentary, as opposed to news, is to actually take a step back and think about like the meaning and the humanity and like the ripple impact, which is how we approach Call Center Blues. It's looking at the decades of impact on the individual who is deported and their family and wider community. And it's really that sort of, room to do that the news cycle just is just absolutely set up against. So yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's a lot more of an, I hate to say advantage, but to have the insight of being at the end of something, or kind of knowing the results of something, and we're still so actively pushing for what needs to happen right now, and we're all kind of we're not waiting and seeing, but we want to see, what is it going to happen as a result of our work, I have a question, or I have David's hand up. David, I'm going to allow you to ask a question if you'd like. Go ahead, David.
Just a quick question about content that's available for streaming. Obviously, the film festival is we've got an embarrassment of riches where there's all this content streaming online now. Do any of you have any of your previous work that's maybe not part of the festival, or if there's other artists' work that's part of the festival that you would really highly recommend? Anything that any of you would want to recommend to all of us who are sheltering in place in various parts of the country and world?
Thanks, David. Anyone want to start?
I watched it. This is, we're just like talking about shorts that are in the festival that we'd recommend.
I think it's pretty broad. So I think, shorts in the festival, or anything previously that might be on Vimeo or on Netflix or any other platform, really. So yeah, go ahead, Gosha.
I mean, in terms of the festival, I watched Deseo this morning. I've been trying to watch the shorts that are just limited streaming for the day, because I won't get to see them. So I mean, I think that's a great place to start. Deseo is a beautiful New York story about ambiguity, an ambiguous romance. And then I don't know, I guess in general, I May Destroy You is something I started watching on HBO by Michaela Cole. She's a British filmmaker, made Bubblegum with BBC. And this is her new series, 30 minutes. It's pretty gripping, and just like fun.
Gita and Jessica, go ahead.
Sure. I'm actually putting in the chat, and I'll put it to everybody. Basically, like a list of films. Again, if we're talking about things that maybe feel topical, that are about that are specific to the moment we're living in right now, around the uprising and the Black Lives Matter moment and movement. I should keep saying moment, but it's a movement. So I'm going to put that in there. There's I feel like that's a list of resources to absolutely, while we're all sitting around, agonizing, and, it's a sort of a good background. So that's what I would suggest. And I think both Jessica and I definitely have work that is streaming online, like in different platforms. So there's, I think, Jess, I don't know about you, but I think if you Google, I think I'm on IMDb, which you could see on there's sort of a list of documentaries, because it's only because I'm older and have been here forever. There's a bunch of films on there.
Yeah.
Is your conversations about race in the list you're going to share too?
No, but I will. I'll put that in as
great.
well.
I think, yeah.
I could even email that to everybody who attended this as well, if you prefer.
Yeah, sure, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
And Brendan, you where can people, anything that you're watching or anything that if people want to see more of your work or anything like that?
This is my first thing as a director, so I've produced some stuff that's out there that you can watch. Good Time being one of them. A movie called Christine from a few years back, I think is still streaming somewhere. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to really dig into the festival program yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I think there's a lot of stuff on there, and I think that one of the kind of, it's a really weird time for festival programming, but it is nice that the kind of, it's great to see things in a theater, but this sort of challenge and exclusivity of seeing things at a festival, it's nice to have things available online. I think it's a really cool thing for people to get to see stuff that they wouldn't normally have access to, and people seem to be looking for things to watch. So I'm just as eager as anyone else to see what's in the festival programming.
Yeah, I very much miss being in a theater. It would have been great to have all of you in Palm Springs, but we also were able to have this Q&A be a lot longer than it would have been otherwise. So again, this was a really great conversation. I really appreciate everybody here and all of your films and all of your work. Thank you so much for doing this. And again, to all the members, thank you. More of this to come throughout the weeks. If you enjoyed this, please tell the other members as well, and your peers and your friends. And we will email everybody here some more suggestions from Gita too, and anyone else really. So I want to thank all of you again. Thank you so much. Hold on, I got a few things in the chat. I think they're just thank yous. Yeah, so we got some thank yous from everybody, and yeah. That's...
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
really
thank you.
Thank you.
Congrats to you guys. Great film.
It was great meeting everybody.
Yeah. Great talking to you.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. Hopefully see you throughout the week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Jeff.
Bye.